Hello everyone, I never thought I'd be the person writing something like this, but here I am. Maybe getting it out will help me process what's been going on. My wife, Megan, and I have been married for 7 years. We met through mutual friends at a party, hit it off instantly, and within a year, we were engaged. She was vibrant, witty, and had this infectious energy that could light up a room. I thought I had hit the jackpot, our marriage was solid at least. That's what I believed. We had our routines, Sunday brunches, movie nights, vacations we planned down to the last detail. We even talked about starting a family soon. I thought we were in sync, that we understood each other on a level most couples could only hope for, but looking back now, I see how blind I was. It started with little changes. Megan became distant, distracted. She was glued to her phone more than usual, quick to lock it or flip it over when I walked into the room. She claimed she was just stressed from work, taking on extra projects to secure a promotion. I believed her because I wanted to. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife. Then she suggested hiring a cleaner. It'll take the pressure off both of us, she said. I didn't think much of it. We both worked full-time, and the idea of coming home to a spotless house sounded appealing. Enter Leo, the cleaner. He was polite, professional, didn't talk much, just did his job and left. I barely noticed him, really, but Megan did. Over time, I noticed she started scheduling Leo more frequently. She was unusually cheerful on the days he came by, always finding reasons to stay home when he was around. I chalked it up to her appreciating a clean house and maybe feeling less stressed. But deep down, something felt off. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. Megan had told me she was meeting a friend for dinner, so I expected the house to be empty. But as I walked in, I heard voices, hers and Leo's, coming from the living room. Quiet, hushed, too intimate for a casual conversation. My heart started racing. I crept closer, and there they were. Sitting way too close on the couch, laughing softly, her hand resting on his arm. It wasn't just the physical closeness, it was the way she looked at him with a warmth and attention I hadn't seen directed at me in months. I didn't confront them right then. I backed away, left the house, and drove aimlessly for hours, my mind spinning. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The woman I trusted most, the life I thought was secure, all of it suddenly felt like a lie. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying what I saw, convincing myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I knew. The next morning was one of the hardest I've ever faced. I woke up feeling like I was in someone else's life, the events of the previous evening replaying in my mind on a loop. Megan acted like nothing was wrong, moving around the kitchen, making coffee, humming softly like she always did. I watched her from the doorway, wondering how she could be so normal while my world was unraveling. I didn't confront her right away. I needed more than what I'd seen. I needed undeniable proof. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was fear, but I wasn't ready to face her without knowing everything. So, I started paying attention. Every detail mattered now, the way she smiled at her phone, the sudden errands she had to run, the days Leo just happened to be scheduled when she was working from home. A week later, I found what I was looking for. Megan left her laptop open on the dining table, claiming she was going to take a quick shower. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. I opened her messages, heart pounding, hands shaking. And there it was, a thread of texts between her and Leo. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Miss your touch. Last time was incredible. I still think about it every night. He's clueless, don't worry. Just be here at the usual time. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. There was no room for doubt anymore. She wasn't just emotionally involved, she was having an affair. In our house. In the space we'd built together. That night, I decided I couldn't pretend any longer. I waited until we were both home, the house silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I know, I said quietly, she looked up, her face a mixture of confusion and surprise. "Know what? I know about you and Leo." For a split second, there was genuine shock in her eyes. But then she quickly masked it with indifference, like she was the one in control of the situation. "You went through my stuff?" she snapped, her tone sharp, deflective. "That's a serious invasion of privacy." I almost laughed. Privacy? That was her concern. "Don't turn this around on me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saw the messages. I heard you. Just tell me the truth." She sighed, rolling her eyes like I was being dramatic. "It's not a big deal. It was just something that happened. You've been distant, busy with work. I needed attention." Her words hit harder than any confession could have. She wasn't even sorry. No guilt, no remorse, just excuses wrapped in indifference that I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, realizing she'd been a stranger all along. "I deserve better than this," I whispered, more to myself than to her, and then I walked out, leaving her sitting there, not even bothering to call after me. Walking out that night was like stepping into a different world. The door closed behind me with a final, hollow click, and suddenly, the streets felt too quiet, the night air too cold. My feet moved on autopilot, carrying me down familiar roads that now felt foreign. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there, not with her, not with the weight of her lies pressing down on me in every corner of our home. That I ended up at Jake's apartment. He's been my best friend since college, the kind of guy who doesn't ask questions until you're ready to answer. I knocked on his door, and when he opened it, all it took was one look at my face. No words, no explanations. He just stepped aside, letting me in like he knew I was carrying something too heavy to hold alone. That I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on his old, worn-out couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment with Megan in my mind. The good times felt like someone else's memories, distant and distorted. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over. How did I not see this coming? What did I miss? Was it my fault? But the truth was, I'd seen the signs. I just didn't want to believe them. The next few days were a blur. I stayed at Jake's, avoiding calls, ignoring texts. Megan reached out a few times, short, emotionless messages. "We need to talk. I'm sorry you found out this way. You're overreacting. We can work through this." Overreacting. As if discovering my wife had been having an affair in our own home was some minor inconvenience. I didn't reply. I didn't have the energy to entertain her justifications, her attempts to twist the narrative. But the silence wasn't easy. It wasn't the peaceful kind that comes with clarity. It was loud, filled with echoes of doubt and heartbreak. I kept thinking about all the times I trusted her, the moments I looked her in the eye and believed her lies. That betrayal cut deeper than the affair itself, the realization that the person you trusted most was the one who hurt you the worst. Eventually, I went back home. Not to see her. I didn't even know if she'd still be there, but to face the reality I'd been avoiding. When I walked through the door, the house felt empty in a way it never had before. Not because she wasn't there, but because the life we'd built together had been hollow all along, propped up by routines and memories that meant nothing. In the shadow of her betrayal that I found a note on the kitchen counter. No heartfelt apology, no deep reflection. Just a few scribbled lines. "I'm sorry for everything. Maybe we rushed into things. I hope you find what you're looking for. Maybe we rushed into things." That was her takeaway after 7 years of marriage. I sat at the table, staring at that note, and for the first time since everything happened, I let myself feel it all: the anger, the sadness, the disbelief. It wasn't just about losing her. It was about losing the future I thought we had, the person I thought she was, and the version of myself that believed in us. But as the hours passed, something shifted. The pain was still there, but underneath it was something else: clarity. I realized that I didn't miss her. I missed the idea of her, the illusion of a life we never really had. And that realization, as painful as it was, felt like the first step toward healing that I started packing her things the next day. Not out of spite, but because I needed to reclaim my space, both physically and emotionally. Every item I boxed up felt like shedding another layer of the past, making room for whatever came next that I still didn't respond to her messages. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I finally understood that she didn't deserve any more of my time, my energy, or my heart. The days after packing up Megan's things felt surreal. There's a strange emptiness that settles in after a relationship ends, not just the physical absence of someone, but the hollow spaces where routines used to live. I'd wake up expecting to hear her in the kitchen, the faint clink of coffee cups, the soft shuffle of footsteps. But the apartment was silent, and that silence was deafening. At first, I thought the quiet would be comforting, a break from the tension, the lies, the weight of betrayal. But it wasn't. It was like standing in the middle of an abandoned house, echoes of memories bouncing off the walls. Every corner held a reminder: the couch where we used to watch movies, the chair she loved by the window, the framed photos I hadn't yet taken down. The first real wave of grief hit me on a random Tuesday. I was making dinner, something simple, pasta and a jar of store-bought sauce, and out of nowhere, I found myself standing in the middle of the kitchen, tears streaming down my face. Not because I missed her exactly, but because this wasn't the life I'd planned. We were supposed to grow old together, build a family, share the mundane routines of everyday life. And now, it was just me and a plate of overcooked spaghetti. I realized then that heartbreak isn't just about losing a person. It's about losing the future you thought you'd have. Jake kept checking in, dragging me out for drinks, convincing me to join him for weekend hikes I had zero interest in. At first, I resisted, preferring to wallow in my own misery. But eventually, I gave in. And, surprisingly, it helped. Not because it magically fixed everything, but because it reminded me that life was still happening with or without Megan. Therapy was the next step. I'd never been the type to open up to strangers about my feelings, but Jake's persistent nudging wore me down. Sitting in that sterile office, across from someone who didn't know me from Adam, felt awkward at first. But after a few sessions, the floodgates opened. I talked about everything, not just the affair, but the years of small compromises, the red flags I'd ignored, the way I'd lost pieces of myself trying to hold on to something that was already gone. That my therapist said something that stuck with me: betrayal isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their character. It sounds simple, but those words shifted something inside me. For so long, I'd been asking myself, what did I do wrong, as if there was some flaw in me that made her cheat. But the truth is, her choices were about her, not me. I could have been the perfect husband, and it wouldn't have changed the outcome. That realization was both heartbreaking and freeing. One afternoon, while clearing out the last of Megan's stuff, I stumbled upon a photo album tucked in the back of our closet. It was filled with pictures from our vacations, birthdays, random moments I'd forgotten about. I sat on the floor, flipping through it, expecting a wave of sadness. But instead, I felt something else: gratitude, not for the betrayal, of course, but for the good times we did have. For the lessons learned. For the strength I found in picking up the pieces. I realized that I didn't need to erase our past to move forward. I just needed to accept that it was part of my story, not the whole thing. That I boxed up the album, taped it shut, and labeled it simply, the past. Not as a bitter reminder, but as a symbol that I was done carrying it with me. Rebuilding your life after betrayal isn't a neat process. There's no roadmap, no checklist to tick off that says, congratulations, you're healed. It's messy. Some days, you feel like you've made progress. You wake up without thinking about them, you laugh at a joke, you feel okay. But then, out of nowhere, something hits you: a song, a smell, a place you used to go together, and you're right back in the middle of it, drowning in memories you didn't ask for. That's how it was for me. After boxing up Megan's things and labeling them the past, I thought I'd feel free, like closing a door I'd never have to open again. But grief doesn't work like that. It sneaks up on you, especially when you think you've got it under control. I'd be doing something as simple as folding laundry or walking past a bakery she loved, and suddenly, my chest would tighten, like my heart was physically trying to shrink from the weight of it all. That I hated that she still had that power over me, even when she was gone. But here's the thing, I didn't want to hate her. I didn't want to carry that bitterness because it felt like another chain keeping me tied to her. So, I made a choice. Not to forgive her, not yet, maybe not ever, but to focus on myself instead of what she did to me. That started with small things. That I rearranged the apartment. It sounds trivial, but moving the furniture, changing the layout, it helped. It made the space feel less like ours and more like mine. I painted the walls a different color, swapped out the curtains she'd picked, got rid of the throw pillows she loved but I always thought were pointless. Each change was a tiny declaration: this is my space now. That I also started running again. Before Megan and I got married, running was my thing, a way to clear my head, find my rhythm. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped, trading it for movie nights and lazy weekends. Getting back into it was tough. My body protested every step, my mind wandered to dark places, but I kept going. Because for those 30 minutes, it was just me, my breath, my heartbeat, and the road ahead. No lies. No betrayal. Just movement. Therapy continued to be a lifeline. It was the only place where I didn't have to pretend I was okay when I wasn't. My therapist once asked me, "What do you miss most about her?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "I don't miss her," I said slowly. "I miss who I thought she was." And that was the truth. That I missed the version of Megan I had built in my head, the loyal partner, the person who knew me better than anyone else. But that version didn't exist. Maybe she never did. And that realization hurt more than anything because it meant I wasn't just grieving a lost relationship, I was grieving an illusion. One evening, after a particularly rough therapy session, I sat on my balcony with a glass of whiskey, staring at the city lights. I thought about reaching out to Megan, not because I wanted to get back together, but because I wanted answers. I wanted to ask why she did it, when it started, what I could have done differently. But then it hit me, her answers wouldn't change anything. Even if she gave me every detail, it wouldn't undo the betrayal. It wouldn't heal the hurt. All it would do is drag me back into a story I was trying to close. So, I didn't reach out. Instead, I wrote her a letter. Not to send, just to get it out of my system. I poured every thought, every feeling onto the page: the anger, the heartbreak, the disappointment. I told her how she shattered my trust, how she made me question my worth, how her betrayal felt like drowning while she stood on the shore, watching. When I was done, I folded the letter, set it on fire, and watched the ashes float away. It wasn't closure, not exactly. But it was a release. As the weeks turned into months, the pain dulled. It didn't disappear, I don't think it ever really does, but it stopped controlling me. I started going out with friends again, laughing without that underlying ache. I even went on a few dates, not because I was trying to replace her, but because I was curious about what life could be like without her shadow hanging over me. One of those dates was with someone named Sophie. We met at a bookstore, of all places, reaching for the same novel. She had this easy smile, the kind that made conversation flow effortlessly. We talked for hours about books, movies, life. It felt good. Natural. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people sharing a moment. When she asked about my past relationship, I didn't flinch. I told her the truth, not every gritty detail, but enough to be honest. She nodded, didn't pry, just said, "Sounds like you've been through a lot. But you're here now." And that's when I realized something important. I was here now, not stuck in the past. Not defined by what Megan did. I was living. The idea of starting over always sounded dramatic to me, like packing your bags, moving to a new city, changing your name, and becoming someone completely different. But real life doesn't work that way. Starting over isn't one big leap. It's a series of small steps. Sometimes, those steps are so subtle you don't even realize you're moving forward until you stop and look back. That's where I was. Life wasn't perfect. The scars were still there, reminders of everything I'd been through. But they weren't fresh wounds anymore. They didn't bleed when I touched them. They just existed, woven into the fabric of who I'd become. My connection with Sophie grew in ways I didn't expect. She was easy to be around, no pretenses, no games. Just real. We spent time doing simple things, grabbing coffee, walking through parks, sharing stories about our lives. There was no rush, no pressure to define what we were. And for the first time since everything with Megan fell apart, I felt like I could breathe, but vulnerability isn't something you flip on like a light switch. Even with Sophie's kindness, I felt the walls I'd built around my heart, the ones I didn't even realize were there, standing tall. Every time she got too close, a voice in the back of my head whispered, "What if it happens again?" It wasn't fair to her. I knew that. She wasn't Megan. She hadn't lied to me, betrayed me, or made me question my worth. But that's the thing about heartbreak, it teaches you to be cautious, even when you don't need to be. One evening, after we'd been seeing each other for a couple of months, she invited me over for dinner. It was nothing fancy, just homemade pasta and a bottle of wine. We sat on her balcony, the city lights flickering in the distance, and out of nowhere, she asked, "Are you afraid to let someone in again?" The question hit harder than I expected. Not because it surprised me, but because it was exactly what I'd been avoiding. I didn't answer right away. I stared at my glass, watching the way the light danced through the wine, and finally said, "Yeah. I am." Sophie didn't flinch. She didn't offer clichés or rush to make me feel better. She just nodded and said, "That's okay. You don't have to be ready all at once." Something about those words cracked through the armor I'd built. She wasn't expecting me to be perfect. She wasn't asking me to forget the past. She was just there, patient and understanding in a way that felt rare. After that night, I stopped trying to force myself to move on like it was some finish line I had to cross. Instead, I focused on being present. Enjoying the moments for what they were, without the weight of expectations, and slowly, I noticed the changes. I didn't flinch when Sophie reached for my hand. I didn't overthink every text, analyzing it for hidden meanings. I didn't compare her to Megan, not consciously, not subconsciously. She was Sophie. And I was me. No ghosts between us. One weekend, we decided to take a spontaneous road trip to a small coastal town a few hours away. It was the kind of trip I would have planned meticulously before booking hotels in advance, creating an itinerary. But this time, we just packed a bag, picked a direction, and drove. There was something freeing about that, about not having a plan. We stayed in a tiny, overpriced motel, ate at a random diner with the best pancakes I'd ever had, and watched the sunrise from the beach, wrapped in a blanket, with sand in places it definitely shouldn't have been. Lying there, listening to the waves crash against the shore, I realized I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't haunted by memories of Megan, or the betrayal, or the life I thought I'd lost. I was just there, fully present in a moment that was mine and mine alone. That's when it hit me. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about living, not despite the pain, but alongside it, until it becomes just another part of who you are, not the defining part, but a piece of the puzzle that shaped you. When we got back from the trip, I found an old photo tucked in the back of a drawer. Megan and me, smiling at some party, frozen in a moment that felt like it belonged to someone else. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I just felt nothing. So I threw it away, not out of spite. Not as a dramatic gesture, just because it no longer mattered. It's strange how healing sneaks up on you. It doesn't announce itself with some grand, life-changing moment. There's no dramatic sunrise, no swelling background music to mark the occasion. Instead, it's subtle, like waking up one day and realizing the ache that's been sitting in your chest has quietly faded. That's where I was. Life had settled into a rhythm I never expected after everything that happened with Megan. But here's the thing, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Mornings became my favorite part of the day. There was something peaceful about the early quiet, the smell of fresh coffee, the simple comfort of sitting by the window, watching the world wake up. No more feeling suffocated by memories. No more starting the day with a weight on my chest. Just me, my thoughts, and a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. Sophie was still in my life, and our connection had grown into something steady and real. It wasn't perfect, we had our disagreements, moments of miscommunication, but it was honest. And for the first time, I realized that's what I'd been missing all along. Not perfection, but authenticity. No games. No lies. Just two people showing up for each other, flaws and all. One evening, we were walking through a local street market, the kind with strings of warm lights overhead and vendors selling everything from handmade candles to vintage records. Sophie stopped to look at a small stall selling old photographs, black and white snapshots from decades past, strangers frozen in time. She picked one up, smiled, and said, "Isn't it wild how these moments meant everything to someone once, and now they're just, here, lost to time?" That hit me harder than I expected, because that's exactly what my past felt like, a collection of memories that once defined me, now just distant echoes. Not forgotten, but no longer heavy. Just part of the story. That we kept walking, and I realized something: I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of falling in love again, not of getting hurt, not of the what-ifs that used to haunt me. Heartbreak had shaped me, yes, but it didn't own me. A few weeks later, I found myself standing in front of the apartment Megan and I used to share. I hadn't been back since I moved out. I didn't plan to go there, I was just in the neighborhood, and something pulled me toward it. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the windows that once framed the life I thought I'd build forever, but I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger. I felt gratitude, not for the betrayal, but for the lessons it taught me. For showing me that I deserved more than someone who didn't value me. For breaking me in a way that forced me to rebuild, not as the person I was before, but as someone stronger, wiser, and more in tune with what truly mattered. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I just stood there for a moment, took a deep breath, and kept walking. Later that night, I thought about everything I'd been through, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights, the endless questions of, why me? And I realized that while I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, I also wouldn't erase it from my story, because without it, I wouldn't be here. Whole. Happy. Free. Sophie and I sat on the couch that night, wrapped in a blanket, the glow of a single lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. She rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "You seem different lately. Lighter." I smiled, tracing my thumb along the edge of her hand. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think I'm finally free. Not from Megan. Not from the past, but from the version of myself who thought I needed someone else to complete me. I was already whole. It's funny how closure isn't what you expect it to be. I used to think closure meant getting answers, having that one final conversation where everything made sense, like the missing puzzle pieces would magically fall into place. But life doesn't work that way. Closure isn't something someone gives you, it's something you create for yourself. As more time passed, I realized that I hadn't just healed from what Megan did to me, I'd outgrown it. The betrayal wasn't the centerpiece of my story anymore. It was a chapter I'd read, learned from, and left behind. And that realization hit me not during some deep, reflective moment, but in the most ordinary way possible, folding laundry. I was standing in my bedroom, doing the most mundane chore, when it struck me I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness that had once been my constant companion was gone. Not because I'd forgotten, but because it no longer mattered. I had moved on without even realizing it. I started to think less about the past and more about the future, not the future I'd once planned with Megan, but the one I was building for myself. Sophie was a part of that, but it wasn't just about her. It was about me, rediscovering who I was without the weight of betrayal dragging me down. We decided to take another trip, this time to a cabin in the mountains. No plans, no itinerary, just us, nature, and a chance to disconnect from everything. The drive up was filled with easy conversation, laughter, and the kind of comfortable silence that doesn't need to be filled. It felt different from any trip I'd ever taken before because there was no underlying tension, no unspoken resentment hiding beneath the surface. The cabin was small but cozy, with large windows that framed the snow-covered trees outside. We spent our days hiking, our evenings by the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot cocoa, and talking about everything and nothing. One night, as we sat watching the flames flicker, Sophie asked me a question I wasn't expecting. Do you think you've forgiven her? I stared into the fire for a long time before answering. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to be sure. I think I have, I said quietly. Not for her sake, though. For mine. And it was true. Holding on to anger was like carrying a heavy backpack everywhere I went, exhausting, unnecessary. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what she did, it was about setting myself free from it. I deserved peace more than she deserved punishment. After that conversation, something shifted inside me. It was like the final thread connecting me to that part of my life had been cut, not with bitterness, but with acceptance. The next morning, I woke up early while Sophie was still asleep. I stepped outside, the cold mountain air sharp against my skin, and just stood there, letting it fill my lungs. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, not just existing, but truly living. On the drive back home, I found myself reflecting on everything I'd been through, the heartbreak, the healing, the growth. If you'd told me back then, in the middle of my pain, that I'd feel this way someday, I wouldn't have believed you. But here I was, proof that you can survive the worst and come out stronger on the other side. A few days after we got back, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Megan. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I opened it calmly, curiosity replacing any sense of dread. It was a simple note: I've been thinking a lot about the past and how things ended. I know I hurt you, and I'm truly sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to acknowledge the pain I caused. I hope you're happy. I read it once, twice, then folded it neatly and put it away in a drawer, not because it meant anything, but because it didn't. I didn't feel the need to respond. I didn't feel vindicated or emotional. I just felt indifferent, and that's when I knew that I was free, not because she'd apologized, but because I no longer needed her to. Sophie and I continued building our life together, not a perfect life, but an honest one. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of getting hurt because I knew I could survive it. I'd already proven that to myself. I wasn't the same person I was when this story began. I was stronger, wiser, and more in tune with who I was and what I deserved. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming your future, and that's exactly what I was doing, one day, one step, one moment at a time. The thing about healing is that you don't always notice it happening. It's not like flipping a switch where one day you're broken, and the next day you're whole. It's quiet, gradual, a slow stitching together of the parts you thought were beyond repair. And sometimes, it's only when you pause and look back that you realize just how far you've come. That's where I was. Life had taken on a new rhythm, one that felt effortless compared to the emotional weight I'd carried for so long. I wasn't waking up with that gnawing sense of emptiness anymore. Instead, there was this steady undercurrent of contentment, not the fleeting, surface-level kind, but the deep, grounding kind that comes from knowing you've weathered the worst and come out stronger. Sophie and I had settled into something real. It wasn't the fairy tale romance you see in movies, and that's what made it beautiful. There were no grand declarations or dramatic gestures, just the quiet comfort of being seen, understood, and accepted. We supported each other through bad days, celebrated the good ones, and found joy in the mundane, cooking dinner together, arguing over which movie to watch, sharing comfortable silences that didn't need to be filled. One weekend, we decided to take a spontaneous trip to the coast. No plans, no reservations, just packed a bag, got in the car, and drove. The salty breeze, the sound of waves crashing, the endless stretch of horizon, it all felt like a metaphor for how far I'd come. Standing there on the shoreline, I realized something profound: I wasn't just healed from the pain. I had grown because of it, and that realization brought a sense of peace I never thought I'd find. While walking along the beach, Sophie picked up a small, smooth stone and handed it to me. "A souvenir," she said with a grin. I slipped it into my pocket, not because it was valuable, but because it reminded me of that moment, simple, unremarkable on the surface, but meaningful in a way that words couldn't fully capture. that stone stayed with me, a quiet reminder of resilience, of the beauty in starting over. Back home, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. I thought about Megan not with bitterness or regret, but with gratitude. Not because of what she did, but because of what I learned from it. Her betrayal forced me to face parts of myself I might have otherwise ignored. It taught me that my worth wasn't tied to someone else's ability to see it. That love isn't about sacrifice without reciprocity. And that letting go isn't the same as giving up. It's choosing yourself. One evening, as Sophie and I sat on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky, she asked me, "Do you ever think about her?" I didn't hesitate. "Sometimes," I said. "But not in the way I used to. It's like remembering an old scar, not because it hurts, but because it's part of the story." She nodded, squeezing my hand gently. There was no jealousy, no insecurity. Just understanding. And that's when I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. A few weeks later, I stumbled upon the letter Megan had written me, tucked away in the back of a drawer. I read it one last time, not out of nostalgia, but closure. Then I tore it up, piece by piece, and threw it away, not because I needed to, because I wanted to. It was the final act of letting go, not with anger, but with acceptance. Life isn't about the chapters that broke you. It's about the ones you choose to write after. And I was writing mine one day, one memory, one breath at a time. If you're reading this, maybe you're in the thick of your own heartbreak, wondering if the pain will ever stop. It will. Not all at once. Not in the way you expect. But it will. You'll find joy again. You'll laugh without guilt. You'll love without fear, and one day, without even realizing it, you'll look back and see how far you've come, because you are not your pain. You are the person who survived it. Closure isn't a moment, it's a feeling that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. It doesn't come with dramatic goodbyes or final conversations wrapped in neat bows. It comes in the quiet, everyday moments when you realize you're no longer carrying the weight of what hurt you. That's where I found myself. Months had passed since I read and discarded Megan's letter. Life had moved on, not in a forced way, but in that natural, inevitable rhythm that time creates. Sophie and I had settled into something beautiful, not perfect, not without its own challenges, but real in a way that felt grounding. We'd created our own routines, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and records spinning softly in the background, spontaneous road trips just because the weather was nice, evenings spent cooking together, laughing at burnt toast or poorly flipped pancakes. It was during one of those ordinary evenings, sitting on the couch with Sophie's head resting on my shoulder, that I realized something profound. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. I wasn't bracing for betrayal, second-guessing every word, every glance. I was present, fully and unapologetically, in a life I never thought I'd find after the heartbreak. But healing isn't just about moving forward, it's about understanding where you've been. And for me, that meant making peace with all the versions of myself I'd met along the way, the man who was shattered by betrayal, the one who doubted his worth, the one who thought he'd never recover. I'd been all those people, but I wasn't them anymore. One crisp autumn afternoon, I found myself walking past a cafe Megan and I used to visit. I paused outside, not because it pulled at my heart, but because it didn't. There was no wave of sadness, no tightness in my chest. Just a memory, faded and distant, like an old photograph tucked in the back of an album. That's when I knew I was free. Later that evening, Sophie and I talked about the past, as we sometimes did, not as a shadow lurking in the background, but as a story that had shaped me. I told her about the cafe, about how it used to be filled with memories that once hurt to revisit. She smiled softly and said, "It's amazing how the places that held your pain can just become places again." And she was right. Pain changes spaces, turns them into landmarks of heartbreak. But healing? Healing gives them back to you. The next day, I went back to that cafe not out of nostalgia, but to reclaim it. I ordered my coffee, sat by the window, and watched the world go by. There was no ghost of Megan sitting across from me. No echoes of old conversations. Just me, in the present, exactly where I was meant to be. Sometime after that, I received an unexpected email from Megan. A simple subject line, "Hope you're well." I opened it out of curiosity, not emotional attachment. She wrote about how life had changed for her, how she'd reflected on the past, how she hoped I'd found happiness. That I didn't respond, not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to say. That my story wasn't tied to her anymore. She was a chapter, yes, but I had written many since, and I would write many more. As I sat there, reflecting on everything, I realized that the most important thing I'd gained wasn't just healing. It was self-awareness. I learned that love isn't about losing yourself in someone else. It's about finding someone who helps you discover more of who you are, and that's what Sophie had been. Not a savior, not a replacement, but a partner who met me where I was and grew alongside me. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone reading this, maybe sitting in their own version of heartbreak, it's this: you will survive, you will grow, and you will find peace not in forgetting, but in remembering without pain. Because life isn't defined by what breaks you. It's defined by how you rebuild, and I rebuilt, stronger, wiser, whole.